I'd like to introduce you to David Coombs, one of the vocal tutors at ICMP. He's a highly regarded session singer and vocal coach and has worked alongside artists such as Beyonce, Elton John and Kylie Minogue. He's going to tell you all about his journey, give you lots of helpful tips on vocal technique and just get you to understand your voice a little bit better. Have fun.
Hi, my name's David Coombs and I'm a voice tutor at ICMP. Here at ICMP we're doing a series of videos on all different instruments about tuition, about learning and about developing the skills that you already have and investigating new ways of performing, and in particular the videos that I'd like to bring to you are all about voice development and some contemporary vocal techniques. So I've been working as a singing teacher for probably around about 20 years now and joined ICMP around about 15 years ago, I would imagine, and I've taught a number of modules at ICMP with singers right the way from beginning through undergraduate and up to master's level. So in these videos I'd like to bring some of the ideas that I've developed over those years and some ways that I think that you might be able to develop your singing voice while you're at home in this rather unusual situation where we're all locked down. What I found over the last few months is that there is a real desire within the community for people to sing. And that might be singing at home, it might be working on new hobbies at home, it might not just be singing, but singing is one of them. And also singing together. There's been a lot of virtual choirs online, there's been a lot of people doing a cappella versions of songs where they sing every single part. And for all of those, you really need to develop your voice to a level that you're happy to put out there in public. And I'm really hoping that over these videos you might develop your voice and become even happier than you currently are with your singing. So let me introduce myself. As I said, I've been working as a vocal coach and as a singing teacher for around about 20 years and working professionally as a singer alongside that the whole time. So my history really was that I've been singing all of my life, doing musicals and shows and concerts right the way through primary school, right the way through university, which is where I studied, I did a degree in music. So I've been singing my whole life, childhood, adolescence and adult life, and always worked across genres. So by that I mean when I was younger I was quite interested, really because I didn't have any exposure to much else as far as learning was concerned, to classical music. So my original studies were as a classical musician, and for all sorts of reasons that stood me in really good stead as a professional musician, because I read music relatively competently. As you can see from the piano over my shoulder, I'm okay at piano as well, which is really useful when you're a singing teacher. However, having completed my degree in music, I already knew that classical music was not an area that I really wanted to work in. And I started working initially in musical theatre and did musical theatre for a while, which I really enjoyed, and I still have a love of musical theatre, and particularly some of the contemporary shows that are coming out, those that have been released maybe in the last 10 years or so. There's been some incredible scores that really have a lot of what I would say popular music or contemporary commercial music within their scores, which is something I particularly am attracted to. Having worked in musical theatre for a long time, I was always sort of on the sidelines of pop and commercial music. So I might have been doing a musical in the evening, but I was regularly doing recording sessions during the day, and finally reached a point where I decided that actually musical theatre was not the thing that I really wanted to be at the forefront of the focus of my singing. But like I say, I still do musicals now. I recorded backing vocals for Cats at the cinema last year, and have done a number of musicals, film scores, films like Nine. There's a lot of music in The Corpse Bride, and also Mamma Mia 2, did the backing vocals on that. So film schools are very important to me, musical theatre is very important to me, but really my heart and soul lies across genres in pop music. So by that I mean I've done backing vocals for artists as diverse as Elton John and Beyonce, Lionel Richie and Westlife. Done backing vocals for Kylie and Shaka Khan. So the thing that I discovered relatively early in my career was that I really love all types of pop music, and that as far as performing is concerned, I didn't really want to be pigeonholed into one type of singing and one type of performance. And that's something that I've developed over the course of my career, and I'm sure most of you watching this video will not be completely tied into one sort of music. You might listen to reggae and rock, and ICMP in a way is all about that. We're all about celebrating all different genres of music, and what it takes to go out into the world and become a professional musician really means to perform with some degree of stylistic authenticity. So we might be doing a little bit of work on that as these videos progress. But really, we're all now on a stage where we're locked down at home. You can already see that my little home recording studio is busy getting stuff recorded for people at home. And what I would like to do over the course of these videos is help you develop your own voice technique. And that might just be so that you can enjoy singing along to these videos and just enjoy singing at home, or you might have larger ambitions where you'd really like to grab your phone, get the a cappella app, which is a fantastic app, record yourself singing and put that up on Instagram. And if that's what you want to do, then hopefully over the course of those videos we'll be able to help you get to that position as well. So having worked as a professional backing vocalist for a long time, one of the things that I realised fairly early on in my career is that it isn't just a matter of great voice technique. To be a backing singer, you really do need to have very, very good voice technique. Your pitching needs to be accurate. You need to be able to breathe and phrase with a group of other people. As a lead vocalist, it's much more about your own personal self-expression. Being a backing vocalist, it's much more about being part of a palette of colours that really makes the lead vocalist sound and look as good as they possibly can as well. So you're much more part of the band while being an emotional and an acoustic support for the person that is at the front of the stage. And that sometimes means that you have to develop a skill set above and beyond, because you need to be able to work in different genres, you need to be able to work with different singers, you need to be able to use your ears all the time while you're actually singing, which may sound obvious, but it's incredible how many singers kind of get a note and get a rhythm and off they go, and then they stop really listening to what's going on around them, and that's where you can run into intonation and rhythm problems. Yeah, so I'm going to be covering all sorts of topics to do with that and working on a song that makes you think rhythmically as well as pitch-wise. So yes, as a singer, backing vocals for lots of artists. I've also worked as a lead vocalist, and in particular with a number of orchestras around the UK doing their pop concerts, because like I say, one of the skills that I'm quite lucky to have developed is one where I read music relatively well. And to do a lot of that sort of concert work, it's really advantageous to have some knowledge of music on the score, so that you can actually sing music from dots and lines rather than only learning music by ear. I mean, it also helps if you're doing an ABBA concert if you can wear 6-inch platform boots as well. And there have been all sorts of situations where costumes, particularly shoes, which always seems to be the one thing that if you're going to get tripped up, it's going to be the shoes that do it. In my professional life, that's the sort of thing that you need to factor into all sorts of areas of your life. Reading music is very useful. Having great technique is important. Being able to listen while you sing is very important. Being able to work with other people is super important. If you're going to go on tour, oh God, in the late 90s, I went on tour for about a year with an artist called Cliff Richard, and we were, as a company, we were completely living in each other's pockets for about a year. And it's very important then that you actually kind of develop an ability to work with people, So there are all sorts of skills that when you study at ICMP we discuss, but fundamentally these videos are going to be about voice technique and hopefully developing your voice to a way where you feel even more confident singing into your phone, because it would be nice to hear some of these recordings at the end, or if it's just that you want to be more comfortable singing around the house, or this is just something that you've always fancied investigating, then that's certainly something that we're going to be thinking about developing over the course of these videos, and I really hope that you enjoy them. So I'm going to stop this section of the video here, grab myself a cup of tea, have a little bit of a think, and then in the next section I'll just talk about some of the basic concepts around good voice technique, and maybe we'll do a couple of exercises. So in this next section of the video, what I'd really like to talk about are some of the basic cornerstones of good singing and how you can practice and warm up each day to help develop those skills, because singing is just like every other skill in life. If you do a little bit every day, the likelihood is that you will advance and progress relatively quickly. But if the only time you ever sing is in front of the sink because you've got the radio on, then the likelihood is that your singing is not going to develop as rapidly as someone who does some work every day. And that doesn't mean to say that the expectation is that you do 3 hours every day. The expectation is really that you do a little bit every day, but while you do that little bit, you do think about the singing. So one of the things that I really stress with singers when they are practicing is that it isn't really the length of time. There's this old adage that says practice makes perfect. Well, to be perfectly honest, practice doesn't make perfect, because you can practice 2 hours a day, but practice badly and progress not one single step. However, you can practice 15 minutes a day, but do really good practice, and you can advance very rapidly. So perfect practice makes perfect. Practice alone is not good enough. So what I want you to think about is maybe setting aside 10-15 minutes a day, but during that 10-15 minutes I'm not saying that you don't then sing afterwards, sing for hours and hours afterwards if you like, but for those 10 or 15 minutes you turn your mobile off, set it to silent, you don't have the radio on, you don't have the TV on in the background, you're not thinking about tasks that you have to complete for the rest of the day. You just give yourself 15 minutes where you seriously think about the singing and nothing else. So if you want to progress, really, the thing to do is, for a little bit of each day, put singing at the top of your list. And that's the same really for everything. That's no great revelation. If you want to become better at writing, you don't want to sit there in a room with a TV on and a radio on trying to write a book while your phone is ringing. There's nice short bursts of focused time work really well for singing. And with that in mind, what I'd like to do to start my singing off is to set all of those devices to airplane mode or silent or off, and then start at a point of almost sort of mental preparation. So I'm sitting down at the moment, which isn't really useful, but if I stand up it's going to sort of interfere with where the camera is for what we do for the rest of this. So what I would like you to do is be standing up and close your eyes, and just for a second take your thoughts down into your feet. So what we're aiming to do is to set up a posture, literally, which makes us comfortable for singing. So if standing up for any length of time isn't comfortable, then of course sit down. And I can do this quite comfortably from where I'm sitting. But just to guide you through it, what we're aiming to do is to try and remove any excess stresses or strains in the body that are there because we've gone, oh, I'm going to sing now. And to sing, I do this. And lots of people think of singing as being a physically very different thing from standing around and chatting. And of course there are huge differences. But fundamentally, if you start setting up postural issues because you think, oh yes, singing, that means strong and lifted shoulders and open chest. Actually, some of those postural things are really not a great advantage. So the first thing we're going to do is go down with our thoughts into our feet. It's very, very easy to stand on the outside of your feet, or to have lots of your weight at the front of your feet, or the opposite, lots of weight at the back of your feet. There is a real connection between pitch height. Often people singing a high note lean forward and stick their chin out, and those sort of things can be counterproductive. They can set up strains and stresses around your larynx that are not really useful. So if standing up is uncomfortable, just do this from a sitting position, but think down into your feet and take your weight onto the balls of your feet. So what I don't want you to do is lean dramatically forward, and obviously do this standing next to something you can put a hand on if you don't have a great sense of balance, if you're worried about falling over. But this is not a dramatic movement. This is just a very, very slight, put the weight on the balls of your feet, and then put most of the weight on your heels, and then very, very gently and slowly think about moving the weight from the front of your foot to the back of your foot until you sort of feel like both of your feet are as connected to the ground as they can be. What can be useful can be to think of someone on the floor beneath you or underground pushing up above your feet so that you really feel like you make a nice solid contact with the floor beneath you. Now, what that might mean is that you end up with a kind of 60%, 40% balance, because you'll probably find that your feet touch the ground underneath your big toe, most dramatically, and underneath your little toe, most dramatically, and then at the back, underneath your heel. Or maybe directly underneath your ankle would be more accurate, because it's not literally the back of your foot, it's sort of, if that's the back of your foot, it's sort of somewhere there. So you might find you've got a little bit of a tripod in the way that your weight is on the ground. You should also maybe feel some connection around the outside part of your feet and sort of that sort of connection, but those might be the 3 points that feel most connected. And that can be very, very useful as you're singing to feel really grounded. The next thing to be aware of is the next big joint above that. So that will be your knees. So what I want you to do initially, and with all of these exercises and all of these processes, only go to a point that is comfortable for you. There should be no point where you're doing this at an Olympic winner's level. These are all very, very gentle things to make you feel about posture. So what I want you to do is bend your knees. So just bend your knees slightly and you'll find that your calf muscles start to engage. They sort of grab on to make sure that your balance is okay. And then as you soften your knees off, they sort of release. And then there's a bit where people would say you lock your knees. It's not a very comfortable thing to do, so don't do it. Just take your knees to a little bit beyond the point where the calves are engaged, and you'll probably, or you'll definitely find that your big thigh muscles start to engage as well. So all of a sudden, we've gone from having a very strong engagement from the calf muscle to moving the knee to a very strong engagement from the thigh muscle. Both of these muscles are really big, and if they're grabbing, then there's all sorts of postural things above that that can be affected. So we want to get, so let's take this thought process now up to the hips. And as far as the hips are concerned, what I want you to do is to gently tilt your hips backwards. So you've got a natural sort of arch in the base of your spine, and what I want you to do is to just make that slightly bigger. So you're sort of sticking your bum out at the back, and then tilt your hips forwards so you go past the natural curve and flatten the base of your spine because you're tightening your hip flexors. And you can do that in a chair nice and easily, just kind of rock backwards and forwards on your hips, and you'll find that there is a point where that comes into balance as well. And then what you might like to do is just take your hips left and right, maybe even in a full circle, and find the point where that feels nice and balanced. So now you're not gripping with your thighs, you've not got an exaggerated arch at the base of your spine, but you do have a little bit of an arch because you're also not pulling upwards. and try and get that postural balance point nice and comfortable. And like I say, from here on in, you can do this sort of exercise sitting in a chair. So coming up from there, we're going to now think up through the spine and come to the shoulders. And like I say, it is very, very common for people to think, oh, one of two things. I should set this very dramatic posture up to sing, or I should be really, really relaxed, because everyone says that singing you should be really relaxed. And actually, if you really relax, your shoulders start to roll in. This is obviously putting undue tension around the neck, so that's not great. But at the same time, pushing your shoulders back into this sort of dramatic pose is also not great. So what we want to do is to do both of those. So just roll your shoulders a little bit forwards and then take your shoulders a little bit back. So you're sort of drawing your shoulder blades together. And there's a point where, for me, around about here, it feels like posturally my shoulders are relaxed but not slack, and my arms are just hanging quite naturally. So it can be quite useful, apologies for a little bit of clicking, it can be quite useful to roll your shoulders back, roll your shoulders forwards, and then just lift them up towards your ears and drop. And like I say, if you have any postural issues, if you have any joint issues, then bypass any of these that are uncomfortable. Because what we're basically aiming to do is relax the body. I don't want you to put it under undue tension. So I don't know about you, but I've been spending a lot of time sitting at a desk, more than I would normally spend. And so what I'm also going to do now is just try and compensate for some of the desk posture that I've had recently. So as with all of these exercises, do not do them if they are in any way uncomfortable. But all I'm going to do is let my chin relax down towards my chest. And I can already feel a muscle down the back of my neck releasing. And I'm just going to let that release. I'm in no way kind of pushing or pulling with any muscles. And then I'm just going to bring my head back up to center. And then I'm just going to look towards the ceiling. Nothing exaggerated, just really moving those vertebrae at the very, very top of my neck with a little bit of isolation. And then all I'm going to do is look over one shoulder and look over the other shoulder. I'm not trying to push my chin any great distance. I'm literally taking it to a comfortable point of looking one way, back to the center. Have you worked out what my good side is yet? And then looking the other way and bringing it back to the middle. And then rolling those shoulders again. So now another thing that is very common, and I mentioned this just a minute ago, is that pitch becomes associated with chin position. So people bring their chin in to sing low and lift their chin high to sing higher notes. And neither of those positions, you can probably see actually, that doing that already pushes my Adam's apple in, and that's where all the sound is produced. So we really don't want to be doing that. So what I'm going to do is both of those positions, but just a little bit, so that I get a sense of how they feel and how they upset the balance of my head as it sits on top of my spine. So the first thing I'm going to do is just bring my chin a fraction forward, and already I can feel muscles down the back of my neck engaging. And then take my chin in towards my neck or my chest. And I can see, I can feel all sorts of muscles starting to tense up down the back of my neck. And none of those are really useful for singing, but they are very, very common habits. So what I'm going to do now is think right the way through my body. Feet are nicely anchored to the ground. Knees and hips are in balance. They're not totally relaxed, but at the same time, they're not locking backwards. My shoulders feel like my chest is nice and open. It's not collapsed in, but at the same time, it's not arriving in the room 3 minutes before the rest of my body. It's just in balance. My chin isn't forwards or back. So my ears are basically above my shoulders, which are above my hips, which are above my knees, which are above my ankles. And then the last thing I'm going to do is just kind of get the sensation that a balloon is attached to the middle of my head. And it's a helium balloon, so it's going up. So all I'm doing is now thinking about aligning and slightly elongating right the way through my body. And once I've got that posture sorted, this is the posture that I'm going to be using to begin my warm-up. Obviously, once you're singing and once you're on stage, you want to be able to move around. You've got 6-inch platform boots, for goodness sake. You want to be able to grab the microphone and move around the stage. This is really something to do to get you to a position where you are ready to start warming up and to start practicing. This has taken just over 10 minutes to get to this stage from start to beginning, but now we've done it once. It's the sort of thing that you can actually do really, really quickly. So I'm sure it will come as no great surprise to most of you that the next thing I'd like to talk about is breathing. Breathing is the absolute cornerstone of good vocal technique, and there are several reasons for that. One is that sound is produced on the exhale for the most part. I mean, there are some very odd sounds that we can all produce on the inhale, and I have had to do those in odd recordings as well to get sort of weird scream sounds. But for the most part, singing is all about the exhale and controlling the exhale and having an exhale that is much, much longer than normal breathing. So what I would like us to cover in the next section of this video, before we actually move on to producing sound and doing sung exercises, is the sort of concepts around breathing for singing. And I'm sure for most of you watching this video, they will make perfect sense, but sometimes you just have to think about them because it's very easy for singing to be taken for granted and it therefore goes wrong, or for it not to be something that's thought of at all, and therefore it can quite dramatically interrupt the message that you're trying to give. There can be all sorts of times in a song where you want dramatic breathing, and then there are other times when it just isn't given enough thought and you end up breathing in the middle of a word because you haven't thought about 3 phrases back to back that are very, very long, and you end up getting halfway through the second phrase and suddenly realising you're getting so low on breath that you have to take a breath in the middle of a word, and that just kind of completely interrupts the flow. There are times in songs when you want to do that. For dramatic effect, you want to breathe in the middle of a word so that it sounds emotionally connected. But for the most part, breathing is all about sustaining the sound that you want without interrupting the flow of the lyric. So you want to be able to get to the end of every line without having to take a breath at a silly place or take lots of breaths, or some people, once they become very good at managing their breath, they don't take a breath and they then end up going much, much too long without taking a breath, and then they suddenly have to snatch short breaths. So what we're going to do is a couple of different exercises just to get us in the thought process of what effective breathing is for singing and what efficient breathing is for singing. And they're going to be all about really consciously breathing rather than taking breathing for granted. So when you or I are standing at a bus stop waiting for a bus to take us down to Westfield and Shepherd's Bush, the breath comes in and the breath goes out and you don't think about it, because if you had to think about every breath that you took, you would never be able to think about anything else at all. So your brain takes care of the breathing and it just sorts it out. When it comes to singing, that process doesn't really work because we need to be much more consciously engaged with our breathing. So there are several things that we need to do, and one is to think about how does that breathing really work. So you may hear of diaphragmatic breathing and people saying, oh yeah, to sing really, really well, you need to sing from the diaphragm. And although that's a relatively useful way of thinking of things, it's not particularly useful in that the diaphragm, which basically connects all the way along the bottom of the rib cage, right the way around the body, it's sort of like a parachute shape across the whole of the body with tubes for food going through. But it basically goes right the way across the body. It connects to the bottom of the rib cage, but it doesn't have any nerves. So with no nerve endings, you can't feel it. So with our previous exercise, we went through the whole body, thinking about feet, thinking about knees, thinking about hips, thinking about shoulders. And with our brain, we can connect into those places. But with your diaphragm, you can't, because there just aren't any nerve endings to connect you to it mentally. But there are lots of things that affect the diaphragm that we can connect to because they do have nerve endings. And those are the things that we use really to control our breathing. So as an example, if I want to take a nice deep breath and someone says, breathe from the diaphragm, oh, I can't really feel the diaphragm. Someone else might say, breathe right the way down into your tummy. Well, now you can't do that physically because your diaphragm can't go down below your tummy. You can't breathe into the tummy, but you can feel the tummy muscles. You can feel those abdominal muscles and you can feel those oblique muscles and you can control them just by thinking about them. So if I want to take a nice decent amount of breath in, then actually that really does work for me as a process, because if I let go of my tummy muscles, I inhale. And so the thought process is not a conscious tightening of anything. It's not like I need to tighten this muscle to bring air into my body. What you actually need to do is let go. You need to be able to relax those tummy muscles around the obliques and around the abdominals. And to a certain extent, you also need to think about the concept of opening your throat. So let's just think about that for a second. If I take a deep breath without consciously opening my throat, I get this. That sort of sound is not going to be great on a microphone. So there are two things I'm doing really. I'm letting go of my abs, I'm letting go of my obliques, and I'm opening my throat. So what's that all about as a concept? Well, lots of things really, and we do it very naturally, and all sorts of things about singing and breathing, fortunately, are very natural. And one of those is the opened throat. So there are certain times when you naturally get an opened throat and quite a dramatic intake of breath. So one is yawning. When you're in an environment and you need to get lots of oxygen into the body, the brain says to the body, right, I need lots of oxygen, I need it now. You don't go, ugh. You naturally just open your throat and, ugh. If you've yawned now, that's fine, because it is contagious. And you naturally open your throat, because obviously if you have a tiny little tube, only so much air can go down. You've got a nice wide tube and lots more air can go down. So your brain connects into the body and goes, right, open your throat, let go of your tummy, and that's it. You get a nice deep amount of breath in without undue noise. So there are certain exercises you can do to kind of connect with that. Oh, and another time that happens is when you get a sort of happy surprise. So what I want you to think about, and try doing this with me, is that you're in a room practicing your singing because David's told you to. You're in a room and someone walks into the room that you haven't seen for years, that you are really, really fond of. You get a moment where you just go, and you will probably feel that there's sort of a lift goes on at the back, this kind of area right at, so if you run your tongue over your top of your mouth, you've got a hard bit of bone that then towards the back goes soft. And towards the back of that, you sort of feel like you get a lift. And that sort of lift and opening of the throat, connected with letting go of your abs, can get lots and lots of air into the body very, very quickly. So let's try that as an exercise. The first thing we're going to do, just to make us much more aware of the noise, is put your fingers in your ears, take a breath as deep as you can, in and out, as fast as you can, but don't worry about the noise level. And what you'll probably get is this. There's lots of air moving in and out, which is great. That's what you want for singing. Maybe not so much the out breath. But if you put your fingers in your ears, you are really aware of the noise that's going on in your body. And you can reduce that noise, just consciously moving the same amount of air but thinking open the throat, let go of the tummy. Don't pull the air in here. Let go and allow the air to come in quickly while opening the throat. And what you will hopefully find is you get this. There is still some noise, there has to be, there's air moving through passages, but it is dramatically reduced. So what we're aiming to do is move quite a lot of air, but without making much noise. So two things to add to this. When you're breathing for singing, as a rough number, I would say don't go to more than 80% in or 80% out. If you go for a maximum inhale when you're singing, this tends to happen. And you can see how compressed this has become. We really don't want the shoulders getting involved. And when we go for a full exhale, this happens. Because we've gone from supporting the breath to pushing it. And that's completely caused my larynx to close because it wants to get involved and create a pressure change. So let's just try a couple of breathing exercises. In the first of these, we're going to inhale for 4 and we're going to sip the air in. We're then going to hold for 4, but trying to consciously think about holding using abdominal muscles rather than holding by closing the throat. We're then going to exhale for 14 and then just relax for the last 2. So if we get a nice beat up here, let's go in 4. In 1, 2, 3, inhale. Hold, exhale. And relax. So that's the point at which you would let all of the leftover air out. So what we're aiming for is never going too high in our breath intake and never going too low in our breath exhale. We don't want to be pushing. So now let's kind of feel where those muscles are a little bit more by putting the actual beat into the inhale. So the inhale is going to go and the exhale is going to go a little bit of kind of gentle support. But we're going to use the same tempo. In 1, 2, 3, go. Hold. And relax. And at this point you will see it starts to become easier to over inhale and over exhale. Those kind of extremes are not really useful for singing. So we'll do one last one where we now double that beat up and the inhale goes and the exhale goes but still 4, 4, 14 and then a relax at the end. In 1, 2, 3, go. Hold, exhale, and relax. Great. So now we've covered the basics of posture and inhale, exhale, breathing efficiency. So we've now covered a little bit of work on posture and breathing. Thank you for watching the video through to the end. If you found any of this useful and would like to continue your studies, then of course get in contact with ICMP's admission team because it would be great to see some of you on site doing some of our courses there. I really hope you've enjoyed it and I hope at some point soon we can meet. Bye for now.